As soon as the Soviets break through the German front in early 1945, the outcome of World War II is clear. The Nazi Führer, Adolf Hitler, knows defeat is inevitable. Even so, on January the 30th, the 12th anniversary of his assumption to power, he makes one last public address.
I expect every German to do his duty to the last, and that he be willing to take upon himself every sacrifice he will be asked to make.
For 10 minutes, Hitler warns his people that after the war, the European nations would not be able to withstand Bolshevism, and calls on them to rise up against the Soviets, even if it means all of Germany will come crumbling down.
He was a Samson who wanted to pull down the pillars of the temple upon him.
For the Führer, he and the German state are one. What he wants, it wants. And if he dies, it must die too. So Hitler orders his men to carry out the Nero Decree, the destruction of his country's infrastructure as a punishment for its defeat. Yet the lingering question to this day is not that this madman is losing the war, but how someone who holds such deranged views came to power in the first place. In the spring of 1889, in a small apartment in Brennau-on-the-Inn, Austria, a town near the German border, Adolf Hitler is born. The fourth of what will be 6 children for this devout Roman Catholic family, young Adolf is quickly acquainted with death as he witnesses 3 brothers and a sister die in infancy. Then there's his father, Alois.
He was someone who would come back home having had a drink and would be violent, would be abusive.
He didn't spare the rod. He thrashed Hitler, teaching him from very early on that might was right and that strength and brutality were allied to domination.
Some beatings are so bad that his mother, Clara, throws herself across her son to take the blows herself. According to her doctor, Eduard Bloch, she was above all absorbed in the care of her children. And although Adolf was not a mother's boy in the usual sense, I have never witnessed a closer attachment. In 1900, Hitler moves to Linz and enters high school, where he is introduced to a doctrine that will influence him his entire life. It will give him a sense of purpose he never had.
He had a history teacher called Leopold Puch, who was fired up with the idea of German nationalism.
Austria is part of a vast empire with ancient roots. Germany is then a newly created country dating from just 1866. Both peoples speak the same language, and a radical idea is dawning that the two should become one.
It was melding together extreme nationalism and patriotism to make a person believe in their country passionately and be part of their racial community. Hitler took that idea that the Germans should be united together in this kind of pan-German, greater German Reich.
In 1907, at just 16 years old, Hitler leaves school for the Austrian capital, Vienna, one of Europe's greatest cities. The young Hitler is armed with a thick set of drawings, determined to train at the prestigious Academy of Arts. Over 100 candidates apply. 28 are to be chosen.
He submits drawings. These are examined, and in the notes that they left the examiners, they say, reasonable drawings, heads very poorly done, no great talent. We do not recommend admission.
Rejection is followed by deep personal loss when his mother Clara dies of cancer. Then comes a final blow. He is rejected by the Academy again.
The second rejection is the more disturbing one because this was absolute now. He had no chance of returning.
Hitler plunges into a deep depression. He makes no attempt to find a job and joins the multitude of men out of work. Finally, he ends up in a homeless hostel, an experience that will brutalize him forever.
I owe it to that period that I grew hard and am still capable of being hard.
To survive, he sells pictures of Viennese buildings, and he also becomes a close observer of politics. He is repelled but fascinated by the growing socialist movement.
He really thought, unless the right can find an antidote to this, we're going to have a communist world.
He's especially intrigued by one of their tactics.
What did influence him was the way that the socialists used violence on the streets to make sure that they got their point across.
I achieved an equal understanding of the importance of physical terror toward the individual and the masses.
Other observations start stirring in Hitler's head. Vienna in 1910 has a huge Jewish population. There are more than 175,000 Jews living in the city, and Hitler starts to loathe them.
Wherever I went, I now saw Jews, and the more I saw, the more sharply they set themselves apart in my eyes from the rest of humanity. I had ceased to be a weak-kneed cosmopolitan and became an anti-Semite.
At a mere 21 years of age, the main building blocks of the Nazis' evil ideology are coming together. Intense personal hardness, extreme nationalism, a belief in the use of violence and terror, and a loathing of Jews.
Vienna was and remained for me the hardest, though most thorough school of my life. In it, I obtained the foundations for a political view which never left me.
Then in August 1914, comes an event that will affect Hitler and all German-speaking peoples in a most horrific way: World War I. At 25, he apparently joins the cheering crowds on the first day of the war.
There's a famous photo of him in the midst of a crowd in the Odeonsplatz, grinning broadly at the announcement that war had broken out.
Smiling because he really thinks that Germany can make its bid for European power, and he wants to be part of it, and on that very day, he signs up to fight for the German army.
The young German nationalist, Adolf Hitler, joins a Bavarian infantry regiment as a messenger. His job is to take vital information up to the front line. But carrying messages was not a safe option.
The regiment suffered very, very high casualties indeed, and Hitler had found out that he wasn't a coward, that he could stand the fact that bullets were whizzing all around him.
In his first year, Hitler is awarded the coveted Iron Cross for bravery. He also shows his characteristic refusal to compromise. When German and British troops meet in no man's land on Christmas Day 1914 to sing carols, he will have no part of it.
How dare they, he said, fraternize in a war? These are the enemy. We can't shake the hands of the enemy who we're going to kill. No, this war was a fight to the finish, and he wanted Germany to win it.
But in 1918, his luck runs out. At the Battle of Ypres, he's blinded by a British poison gas attack.
Particularly virulent sort of gas called mustard gas, which attacks the lungs, the eyelids, the soft tissues.
The wounded Hitler is transported to a military hospital in northern Germany for treatment.
Usually, when a soldier is particularly affected by that attack, he is blinded, but the blindness goes away in a few hours or days.
But strangely, Hitler's eyesight doesn't return. His doctors can't understand it. One story goes, they ask a leading German psychologist, Edmund Forster, to take a look at him. Forster concludes that his blindness is hysterical, not physical. He prescribes that the only way to cure Hitler is to boost his ego. Forster hypnotizes Hitler and tells him that he is blind, but as God has made him an exceptional person, he can regain his eyesight again through sheer willpower.
Hitler would have learned that despite his humble rank and his humble background, he was a special being. And the idea that he had been singled out by destiny for a special role in history.
Forster allegedly tells Hitler that he is the person who can make Germany great again. It's a message that Hitler takes to heart. He is not like other men. Forster then holds a lit candle in front of Hitler's eyes and says that if he can see the flame, he's cured. The mind game works. Hitler's vision returns, and he becomes convinced he is a man of destiny. At the end of World War I, Corporal Adolf Hitler hears some devastating news.
He says a trembling pastor came in and said Germany had surrendered, the war was over, Germany had lost.
Everything went black again before my eyes. There followed terrible days and even worse nights. In these nights, hatred grew in me. Hatred for those responsible for this deed.
Convinced he is a man of destiny, Hitler makes a promise to himself.
When I was confined to bed, the idea came to me that I would liberate Germany, that I would make it great. I knew immediately that it would be realized.
By 1919, the 30-year-old Hitler returns to a Munich ravaged by war. He believes that Germany only surrendered because it had been betrayed by left-wing politicians, many of whom were Jews, who plotted to ensure Germany's defeat.
He viewed that armistice in 1918 as a stab in the back for the German military and had been done, in his mind, by the politicians of the centre and, crucially, by the Jews.
True to his vow to make Germany great again, he drifts into a fringe political party, the German Workers' Party. They have no members of parliament and only a few hundred supporters, but they do have rousing meetings in beer halls. He loves their communist bashing rhetoric and their hatred of the Jews. The party members quickly notice Hitler's passion as a speechmaker and enlist him as their propaganda chief.
Within a year, it becomes known as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, what we now call the Nazi Party, and Adolf Hitler is its leader.
Once in charge, Hitler starts to apply one of the lessons he learned in Vienna. Violence works. He forms a paramilitary organization made up largely of disgruntled ex-soldiers like himself, his so-called brown shirts, or stormtroopers.
The Nazis' paramilitaries were prepared to commit acts of thuggery and even of murder. And this, of course, accorded very much with Hitler's own philosophy of force and violence.
At this stage, Hitler's aim is to seize power by force, not election. So in 1923, he plans a coup. His inspiration comes from Italy. He particularly admires the rise of a new popular right-wing movement, the fascists, led by Benito Mussolini.
He saw Mussolini was this giant poser with his shaven head, and everybody knew about Mussolini and the fascist party.
In October 1922, Benito Mussolini marches on Rome with his 30,000 black shirts and storms to power in Italy.
The evidence from Italy was that power could be seized. You didn't need to win it through the ballot box.
Hitler decides to do the same. With his 600 stormtroopers, he takes over a beer hall in Bavaria, where the state prime minister Gustav von Kahr is holding a meeting. As he enters the building, he fires a shot into the ceiling and declares a national revolution. Then he marches into Munich to seize power. The state police have been alerted and open fire. "14 Nazis are killed. Only wounded, Hitler manages to escape. But 3 days later, he's arrested and sentenced to 5 years for treason. It looks like he's finished. Prison turns out to be a time of reflection for the future Führer. It's a chance to turn his extreme views into something that resembles a coherent political program. With his fellow Nazi Rudolf Hess taking dictation, he writes a book that will be read the world over, Mein Kampf. It's Adolf Hitler's blueprint for a new world order.
Mein Kampf, the seminal book of the Nazi movement and of Hitler personally, a kind of mixture of autobiography and political manifesto. It is the key document, since all his ideas are there.
Hitler talks about how Germany is a racially superior nation. It's an idea that comes from a bastardized version of Charles Darwin's concept of the survival of the fittest. He claims that all true Germans belong to a race whose blood is stronger than that of all other peoples, the Aryans. Proof of the Aryan superiority would be their ability to dominate other peoples.
He very much identified the Aryan idea with the modern Germans. They were supposed to have physical characteristics such as blonde hair, blue eyes. They were supposed to be tall and manly.
Nature knows no political boundaries. She puts living creatures on this globe and watches the free play of forces. The stronger must dominate and not blend with the weaker, thus sacrificing his own greatness.
They were the people who were going to be the master race in Nazi Germany, and everybody else was coming lower down the pecking order. And God help you if you were near the bottom.
To no surprise, in Hitler's deranged universe, the Jews are the people at the bottom, as he refers to them, a cancer, eating away at pure Germanness.
The Jews were prominent, and they were involved in finance, so banking and the loan system was tied up with Jews. Very easy there for a bankrupt nation, bankrupt in money and in ideas, to turn on the Jews as the obvious explanation.
The personification of the devil as the symbol of all evil assumes the living shape of the Jew.
He denounces the Jews as the agents of Germany's downfall, as an inherently corrupt enemy within who must be destroyed, must be eliminated.
Anti-Semitism is nothing new in Germany or Austria, but Hitler takes extremism to extremes. Even in the early 20s, he is explicitly writing about his desire to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth.
He talks about Jews being held under poison gas. So this is a very, very chilling precursor of the actuality which came to pass 20 years later with the actual Holocaust.
Hitler argues that the Aryans' racial superiority should drive his foreign policy. First, they should be allowed to take back all territory that was taken from Germany at the end of World War I, and rebuild the army to become the most powerful in Europe. Then he goes further.
One of the most sinister ideas advanced in Mein Kampf was the idea of Lebensraum, the German word for living space.
In Hitler's view, the Germans have the right to seize land from the racially weaker peoples. This means the Slavs, in particular, the Russians.
Where was space to be found? In the east. The millions of square miles stretching across into Russia. That's where Germany must expand.
By the time Hitler leaves prison, he adds one other extraordinary idea to his set of beliefs. He is not just an exceptional person, he has become the Messiah. At a celebration in 1926, he announces to his friends that he will complete the work that Christ had begun, but had been unable to finish. He even claims that he is visited by an almighty power, who tells him that he has been chosen as Germany's savior. One day, this belief will be shared by others.
There are churchmen, right through to the collapse of Germany in 44-45, who said that Hitler was the nearest thing to the redevelopment of the Christian principle in action.
The idea that he is the chosen one now permeates Hitler's political campaigning as he attempts to take the Nazis from a party of violence to one that can win an election.
A plane carrying Hitler would circle over the stadium, which he would speak, and then he would come down like a Messiah descending from the heavens. He would then wait until the crowd was so silent that you could hear a pin drop.
Der 6. Parteitag der Bewegung geht zu Ende.
Before he launched gradually into his oration, gradually building up to an enormous climax.
Und festigen und auf ihren Schultern tragen den deutschen Staat, das Deutsche Reich.
And this was enormously effective in winning the support of the masses.
Slowly, it starts to work. The Nazis become one of the biggest political parties in Parliament. Then in 1929 comes the event that will catapult Hitler into power. The Wall Street crash and the Great Depression. Germany is hit worse than any other country when American banks withdraw their loans.
Within a couple of years, 6 million Germans were out of work and really on the breadline.
People start longing for a strong leader to see them out of this crisis. So the Nazis surge in the polls. In 1933, the Nazis become the largest party in parliament, leading to the once imprisoned political agitator Adolf Hitler being offered the role of Chancellor of Germany. For a man with a God complex, it's a position he uses to decide who will live and who will die. He got here by democratic means. But now that democracy has served its purpose, it's time to put an end to it. He persuades Parliament to grant him emergency powers and suspend the Constitution. The German people have no idea what horrors they're in for. First, he begins his creation of a German master race.
What Hitler wanted was a racially pure master race. And of course, this involved selective breeding, it involved the fittest in society. It was the tallest, the fastest, the fittest.
In 1933, Hitler issues a law to prevent hereditarily diseased offspring. It's a racial hygiene program to sterilize parents and potential parents deemed to be undesirables from having children.
400,000 people are sterilised between 1933 and 1945, and these are ordinary German citizens because they don't fit the master race principle.
He then proclaims the Nazi Party is the only political party permitted in Germany and unleashes his stormtroopers. 4,000 communist politicians and their supporters are beaten up, imprisoned, or murdered, an action that destroys them as a political force. Now Hitler plots to eliminate all other political enemies, even those on his own side. Amongst them is the head of his stormtroopers, Ernst Röhm. Röhm has known him for years and is the only one permitted to call him Adolf. But Röhm is making too many independent noises for his Führer.
The pivotal moment in the creation of Hitler's dictatorship is the Night of the Long Knives. Almost like a Don Corleone evening with the aim of crushing the stormtroopers.
Hitler organizes a deadly trap. He orders all the stormtroopers' leadership corps to attend a meeting in the pretty holiday town of Bad Weisse in the far south of Germany. In the early morning hours, he arrives at a lakeside hotel in the town with members of the SS, his personal bodyguard. Together they make their way to Röhm's room. Hitler bursts in and says,
Aufstehen, Sie werden verhaftet!
"Get up, Ernst. You're under arrest for high treason." The following day, he's back in Berlin, hosting a tea party in the garden of the Chancellery for his cabinet and their families, as though all is normal. And for a man as evilly deranged as Hitler, it was. But in reality, over the last 24 hours, roughly 200 senior SA officers are arrested. Many are shot, including Röhm. Then he turns on his opponents outside the party. A code-worded phone call sets in motion what will become one of the most notorious events in Nazi history. Hitler eliminates members of the church and all his political enemies. The former Chancellor, General Schleicher, is shot down in his own home.
The man who'd sabotaged the beer hall putsch in 1923, Gustav von Kahr, was dragged out of his house, taken to a swamp and butchered with a pickaxe.
Hitler's actions hammer home that he really is a godlike supreme ruler of Germany. He now has the power to decide who lives and who dies. Having wiped out all opposition, he can now move on to the next phase of his revolution that he plotted in Mein Kampf, the elimination of the Jews. At the annual party rally, held in Nuremberg in 1935, the Nazis launched new laws. Marriage between Germans and Jews is prohibited. Jews are stripped of their citizenship and their civil rights.
Jews eventually were forced to wear the famous yellow stars. Brutal, menacing stormtroopers stood at the entrance to the stores with placards saying, "Don't buy from Jews."
3 years later, Hitler goes a stage further. His stormtroopers unleash their unique brand of terror throughout Nazi Germany and Austria. They call it the Night of Breaking Glass, or Kristallnacht. 1,000 synagogues are burnt, and 7,000 Jewish businesses are destroyed.
Jews themselves were physically attacked, scores of them were killed, swastikas were actually carved into their flesh.
30,000 Jewish men are arrested and sent to concentration camps, where most will perish. For the first time, the German people can see what Hitler's anti-Semitism really means. 250,000 Jews flee the country, but over 200,000 still remain. All the while, Hitler is building up his military to seize more land for Lebensraum. The treaties at the end of World War I have limited Germany's forces to just 100,000 troops. But as he promises in Mein Kampf, he creates the most advanced army in Europe.
We have the whole of Germany militarized, motorized, rearming at a rapid pace under his direction, and it is a country utterly transformed.
Hitler now pushes through his foreign policy goals towards Lebensraum. First, he sends his troops into the Rhineland, an area that had been part of Germany before World War I and has since been occupied. 2 years later, he annexes Austria, fulfilling his schoolboy dream of uniting the German and Austrian people.
We need back the Rhineland, we need Austria, we need all the parts were taken from us. There's a logic, and many people were convinced. Even Churchill said that in logic, Hitler had a case.
A year later, Hitler seizes a part of Czechoslovakia with a large German population, before pushing forward to take the rest of the country, even though there are no Germans there.
Germany needs to expand, needs to take territory, mainly towards its east.
Each time the result is the same. Britain and France talk tough, but do nothing. So when they say that they will declare war if he invades Poland, he ignores them. On September the 1st, 1939, Hitler attacks Poland. World War II begins. For the first time, foreign leaders see what a madman Hitler really is. Never before has an invading army targeted civilians with such wholesale savagery.
As Hitler himself said, this is a war of racial annihilation.
Anybody in your way, destroy it. So civilians, as well as military, can be destroyed.
The German army's crimes are so horrific that at the time they have no name. Later, they will be called crimes against humanity. Tens of thousands of Poles are executed, and within 6 weeks, Poland is crushed. 2 million Polish Jews now find themselves in Nazi hands, awaiting their fate. In the spring of 1940, Denmark surrenders, and Norway is taken. From May through June, Hitler's tanks overrun France and the Low Countries. To Hitler, these successes reinforce his personal belief that he is the Messiah for the Aryan people, and remove any hesitation when it comes to invading Stalinist Russia.
In June 1941, having primed his army with the idea that mass murder was going to be not only tolerated but encouraged, he launched the attack on the Soviet Union.
The Führer regards this invasion as Germany's final struggle for Lebensraum, the living space, which he promised in Mein Kampf. And he commands his troops to flout the rules of war. As Slavs are racially inferior to Aryans, they do not deserve mercy. Soviet prisoners of war are sent to starvation camps, where 2.6 million perish from hunger, and another 500,000 are murdered. Even so, the evil Adolf Hitler is truly capable of hasn't even started. By July 1941, his armies have invaded Poland and the Soviet Union countries, containing millions of Jews. Now at last he can enact the most evil of his racialist ideas, that the Jews are a cancer that must be cut out.
In pursuit of Hitler's insane ideal of physical and mental perfection, those who were deemed unworthy to be citizens of the new Reich were put to death.
Einsatzgruppen, special death squads, are sent in to murder the Polish and Russian Jews. Their victims are made to dig a trench. A first wave gets into the trench and then are shot. The next group get in and are shot and are laid on top of the first group. And on and on.
And something like 1.5 million Jews are shot in that process.
It's known as sardine packing. It's a means of eliminating the Jews that is both expensive and inefficient. In top secret, Hitler's henchmen are experimenting with other forms of mass murder. As a forerunner of what will become known as the final solution, Hitler's plan for the annihilation of all European Jews, the Nazis begin a secret euthanasia campaign to kill disabled children.
Children with Down syndrome or various other mental and physical disabilities would be taken away from their families, taken to a special hospital where they would be put to death by lethal injections.
Some 5,000 innocent, sick and disabled children are murdered by lethal injection, administered by carefully selected nurses and doctors. But this too proves to be slow and expensive. A secret department, known as T4, is set up to find a way of killing as many people as possible, quickly and quietly. It tries out poison carbon monoxide gas in shower rooms, where a further 70,000 physically and mentally disabled men, women and children are killed. When the truth about the killing emerges, people are distressed that their friends or family members might be targeted.
Euthanasia went beyond what had originally been planned, so much so that many Germans, learning of it, began to protest. And he withdrew it, the programme, in late '41, realising that it had gone beyond what they would accept.
Their protests teach the Führer that Germans don't like seeing mass slaughter. Future killings will have to be well hidden, far from Germany, and he must not be directly associated with any of it. These lessons will define how Hitler deals with the Jews. He realizes if he wants to carry on his secret plan of extermination, he must fool his people and give the appearance of the kind, caring leader. So he never personally signs a compromising document again.
He never ordered a Holocaust. There is no record, there is no document with his signature. However, everything that was done in his name.
And so in Adolf Hitler's name, the final solution is born: the annihilation of all the Jews in Europe. By December 1941, his final solution is underway. A network of extermination camps is built in Poland, Names like Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, Majdanek, and Auschwitz represent the culmination of his racial evil theories. Jews from all over Europe are rounded up and taken to these camps.
On arrival there, of course, some would have died, but would have perished of hunger and thirst on the journey. The cattle trucks would be unlocked, and the Jews would find themselves tumbling out onto the platform, where they would be met by SS guards with whips and holding famished dogs on leashes. They would be roughly separated into groups. Families would be brutally torn apart then and there. Some pathetic attempts were made to disguise the horror of what was happening. The gas chambers themselves were said to be delousing shower units, so the Jews would take off their clothes and would be driven naked into the gas chambers. The doors of the gas chambers would then be sealed. The gas were turned on and horror, scenes worse than Dante's Inferno, would be enacted. The screams, the horror of men, women and children, piled on top of one another. A truly horrifying, almost unimaginable scene.
Planned, organised, industrial-scale destruction of the whole people. That is new. That is something horrifically new.
I think Hitler is uniquely the most genocidally evil dictator that there ever was, and fundamentally, he was going to kill as many people who were outside of his master race principle as he possibly could.
Over the years, the killing machine is refined. From arrival to death of the Jewish prisoners now took less than an hour. These death chambers were easily capable of killing 12,000 to 15,000 victims every day. It culminates in the hell that is Auschwitz.
Auschwitz-Birkenau, most famous camp of that period, down in southern Poland. There are 6 death camps set up, all within occupied Poland, which are expressly designed for the mass killing of human beings.
It's just purely death. They're not camps in which people work or there's slave labour used. These are just pure and simple death camps.
Murder on such an industrial scale creates one particular problem. Hitler needs mass participation.
It involved office workers, train drivers, transportation of people, workers who worked in the camps, Nazi bureaucrats who had wives back in Germany. Nobody could be unaware about what was going on in the Holocaust because, of course, it involved everyone.
To make the Holocaust socially acceptable, Hitler's solution is to blame the Jews for their own destruction.
If the international Jewish financiers should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, then the result will not be the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe.
In that statement, Hitler attempts to absolve the German people of any guilt. The Jews are made responsible for their own misery. By the end of 1944, 6 million Jews are murdered on his approval. Hitler believes he's finally achieving his dream, but ultimately, he will be proved wrong. Those inferior people he so detests are now closing in on him. In 1945, Germany is being pummeled. And the Red Army are pushing towards Berlin and the Fuhrer.
It's an ultimate irony that the regime which was destined to last 1,000 years, in fact, only lasted 12, and was, in the end, reduced to an underground bunker beneath the shattered ruins of Hitler's chancellery in the middle of Berlin. It's a sort of grotesque, bizarre picture of a demented dictator in the last days of his life ruling what was by then a phantom Reich. In the end, he wanted total destruction. His view was, in the ruthless struggle for life, Germany had failed him, and therefore Germany deserved to die when he died.
For the Nazi messiah, Adolf Hitler, his victories are long gone, leaving him reduced to a doddery old man, high on a cocktail of drugs.
Hitler is in this bunker like a cornered rat, and at his last meal with his secretaries, he is talking not about the fate of the German Reich, not about the extermination of the Jews. He's actually, the subjects of his conversation is the ideal breeding of dogs, and the fact that in his view, lipstick is manufactured in France from excrement that's scraped from the walls of the Paris sewers.
One by one, his loyal cronies abandon him. One of the few people left is his mistress, Eva Braun, who he refuses to marry until the day before they commit suicide. Before his remaining advisors, the bride and groom swear they are both of pure Aryan descent. Shortly after 3 p.m. on the last day of April 1945, Hitler and his wife Eva withdraw to his private apartment in the bunker. He hands her a cyanide capsule. The decision is made. They will end their lives together. Eva takes the poison, and Hitler shoots himself with his Walter PPK. So ends the life of the most evil dictator the world has ever seen. Just over a week later, on May the 8th, 1945, Germany surrenders. Hitler's war is the bloodiest in the history of the world. And with the discovery of his death camps, everyone learns the true evil of his regime.
Hitler was something uniquely different in history. He was a man who brought ethnic cleansing and murder into the policy of a war.
The greatest testimony of how very wrong he was is modern Germany. Today, it is stable, democratic, multicultural, and tolerant. Everything that Hitler would have hated. By August 2nd, 1990, Saddam Hussein's uniquely sadistic regime has terrified Iraq for over a decade. But his megalomania reaches dazzling new heights when he sends his 1 million man strong army to invade his tiny Arab neighbor, Kuwait.
Saddam's invasion of Kuwait was perhaps his most colossal miscalculation. He didn't think that the United States was going to react militarily.
In the past, the West has let him get away with far worse. But this decision marks the beginning of the end to a lifetime of cruelty and viciousness that started a little more than a half-century earlier. The story begins in the village of Al-Ujah, 5 miles outside the Iraqi town of Tikrit.
No electricity, no paved roads, mud brick houses.
It's here, according to his mother, that the future dictatorial president of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, starts killing people before he's even born. Just months before his birth, Saddam's father and elder brother die.
Saddam's mother said that she was carrying Satan in her belly and that he killed all the other men in the family, his father and his older brother, in order to be the only man in the family. Saddam's mother wanted to actually kill the fetus Saddam before he was even born.
Despite her wishes, he's born on April 28, 1937, and is given a most fitting name.
Saddam means the one who confronts. The name she gave him was so perfect for him, because he was a guy who would confront people left, right, and center.
Rejected by his mother, Saddam is sent to live with his uncle, Khairala Talfa.
This left a very, very deep imprint on his personality, that he could never count on anybody except for on himself.
His uncle is a Nazi sympathizer who later sets out his own political philosophies in a pamphlet called Three Whom God Should Not Have Created: Persians, Jews, and Flies.
Khairala Talfa was an anti-Semite to the bone. It's very reminiscent of Goebbels, of the Nazi propaganda. So I would say, if you combine his prenatal history, which is traumatic, with his early childhood history, which is unhappy, I can see how a man like that grows up.
Meanwhile, his oil-rich country, long dominated by the British Empire, is dealing with its own turmoil. And in 1958, General Abdul Karim Qassem leads a military coup to dethrone Iraq's puppet monarchy and drive out the British. Quickly, Qassem's regime is plagued by power struggles and dissent. Having joined the Ba'ath Party, a radical, secular nationalist movement a year earlier, Saddam eagerly supports its goals of taking over the country.
He joined the Ba'ath Party because it was the most activist political party in Iraq of the 1950s.
Their plans include assassinating General Qassem, and there's a young street thug named Saddam Hussein they think is just the man for the job. Despite being a very junior Ba'ath Party member, the 22-year-old's reputation for enjoying violence gets him a place in the hit squad.
They knew that he knows what to do with the gun.
Saddam arranged two squads on both sides of the road like this, and Qassem in his jeep was driving here, like this. Of course, if you shoot from both sides, you have a better chance of hitting the jeep than if you shoot from only one side, right? The two squads started shooting at each other.
They were all sure that Qassem was killed.
In the mayhem, Saddam is shot by one of his fellow assassins, but manages to flee the scene.
They went to the place where the getaway car was supposed to be waiting for them. And they found out the driver of the getaway car is not in the getaway car. He's sitting in a coffee shop nearby, playing backgammon. It was a real farce, a parody of an assassination attempt.
General Qassem survives. It looks like Saddam's career in the Ba'ath Party has ended in failure before it's even begun. A wanted man, he goes on the run. Four years later, where he spectacularly failed, other Ba'athists succeed. In 1963, General Qassem is deposed and executed. Saddam returns home from exile, itching for political office. But he's seen as a thug, and no one thinks of him as a leader. So he's only offered a junior role working with Iraqi peasants.
Saddam was very ambitious, but he knew one thing, that the party was very hierarchical. He was a very young man, and everybody else was older and with much greater veteranship of party membership. So I think he understood it.
Then, in July 1968, his luck changes. His distant relative, and senior Ba'ath Party member General Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr seizes power in a coup.
Saddam looked up to al-Bakr, and al-Bakr looked at Saddam very favorably, almost like a son.
Al-Bakr needs to appoint a head of security services to protect his new regime from counter-coups.
His colleagues, older, much better educated, longer membership period, they felt it was below them to pull out teeth and to pull out fingernails.
Young Saddam, on the other hand, has a quality that makes him only too happy to take on the role.
Sadism was one of the chief features of his personality. Saddam Hussein was probably more sadistic than Hitler, and that does mean to take great pleasure in the pain or suffering of others, and amusement in the pain and suffering of others.
Al-Bakr has no idea that he's just given a sick and twisted man a free pass to create a complete terror apparatus, an organization that ultimately proves vital to Saddam seizing total power.
He recruited all the people from his own tribe, young men who were very tough, not very much educated, but tough, knew how to use weapons, trained them, and they became like his puppies. They were eating from his hand. And they called him Amnat Shabir, our grand uncle. And they knew that all the good things they get, and they got a lot of good things. Money, cars, homes, you name it, they got it. And they were village boys. So for them it was like a quantum leap of incredible proportions.
Saddam's role in the security services establishes his reputation for absolute ruthlessness.
Unlike other would-be dictators, Saddam personally enjoys inflicting pain. His torture chamber becomes infamous.
The name of the place was the Palace of Doom.
Here he regularly takes part in torture and has great delight in coming up with a range of cruel and unusual techniques. Over the next decade, he revels in perfecting 107 different methods.
There's a long list of tortures that they were practicing, like the falaka, the lashes on the palms of your hands and feet, all kinds of electrocution, what they call the parakeet, hanging people from fence on the ceilings and beating them. The submarine, dropping the head of the person into a bucket full of water. Acid pools. But they really enjoyed burning cigarettes into prisoners' eyes.
He does his job so well, General al-Bakr makes Saddam his vice president.
He was a shooting star. All of a sudden, almost out of nowhere.
By 1968, Saddam Hussein, unwanted by his mother, unsuccessful assassin, and unstoppable sadist, is just a heartbeat away from ruling Iraq. So one of the very first things Mr. Deputy, as he likes to be called, does is turn his sadistic mind towards a vulnerable part of the population. Iraq's ancient Jewish community.
Jews were deeply hated by so many people in Iraq, deeply hated. It was just over 2 years after the Six-Day War. In the Six-Day War, Iraq, like Egypt, like Syria, like Jordan, was beaten very badly by Israel. So the hate for the Jews was absolutely palpable everywhere.
Now Saddam puts into practice the anti-Semitism his uncle could only write about. He has 14 men and boys arrested and put on trial for spying for Israel.
There was hardly a trial. It was a show trial. The whole thing was one big joke. There were no proof, there was nothing.
Among the accused is Samira Ilyas's 17-year-old brother, Heskel.
He was an ambitious, charming boy. Everybody loved him. He was in love with life.
In early 1969, the falsely accused are hanged.
It was shown on TV, but we couldn't watch. It was too horrible to watch. We just kept crying. What else could we do? It was a black day. It was a horrible day. Beyond description. Life was over.
By the time Saddam is overthrown, some 3 decades later, there will only be 34 Jews left in Iraq. But what the cheering crowds fail to realize that day is that Saddam is sending a message to all Iraqis.
Saddam was very clever. Very clever. He decided it was beneficial to hang them, to scare everybody. Every intelligent Iraqi, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, understood that this is a new era. They felt all of a sudden that they were becoming very vulnerable.
The Iraqi vice president doesn't plan to get to the top by cruelty alone. To achieve his ultimate ambition to become a great leader, he's worked out he'll need Iraq to become great too. With the full backing of President al-Bakr, Saddam Hussein begins leading the country's complete social and economic revolution. In 1972, he nationalizes the oil industry, giving him fistfuls of cash to transform Iraq's infrastructure.
This was a period of massive development. This was a period of massive investment by the state, development all over the country. He is also carrying out a massive campaign to eradicate illiteracy. And it earns Iraq an international prize, which was given by UNESCO.
If you don't challenge the system, it's a wonderful time to be an Iraqi. And Saddam makes sure everyone knows it's all down to him.
There is a similarity, a striking similarity, between Iraq and Germany once Hitler took over in 1933. If you remember, Adolf Hitler became quite popular in the mid and late 1930s in Germany. Saddam became popular too.
With his security service quietly weeding out opponents, and as the public face of popular reform, over the next 10 years, Saddam's power base grows and grows.
By the mid-70s is by far the most important figure in Iraq, even if formally he's only the vice president.
Saddam's method was very clever. Saddam was doing all these things in the background under the cover of running al-Bakr's government, which actually helped Saddam consolidate his own power.
Saddam knew how to bide his time. His patience is one of the most important characteristics.
Confident he's done enough to prove his credentials as a leader, Saddam sets in motion the next phase in his bid for ultimate power. Little by little, he starts undermining his mentor and boss, President al-Bakr.
Saddam started bad-mouthing Bakr. He's saying to everybody, he's old, he's senile, he's falling asleep in meetings, he's no good. Wait until I come on top, and you'll see what kind of glory Iraq is going to be.
Finally, in July 1979, he decides the time is right to achieve his destiny.
17th of July is Revolution Day in Iraq. On that day, traditionally, the president of Iraq, Ahmad Hassan al-Bakr, was supposed to give a speech.
But hours earlier, on the eve of the annual celebrations, Saddam makes the president an offer he can't refuse. Resign or else. Saddam accompanies al-Bakr to make his televised resignation speech. The general will spend the rest of his life under house arrest. At only 42 years old, Saddam Hussein is now president of Iraq.
He has a problem that not everybody accepts his declaration and him as a president. So the Saddam calculative mind starts thinking about the next step.
6 days later, the new president calls a special meeting of senior Ba'ath Party members, which he records. This is the actual footage of what is one of the most notorious events of Saddam's reign.
People are invited to the Congress without knowing what is on the agenda. It starts with Saddam announcing that something very sad and tragic happened.
He claims he's uncovered a conspiracy against him. He then introduces senior Ba'ath Party member Muhi Abdal Hussein Mashhadi, the man Saddam claims is the plot's ringleader.
You can actually see how frightened he is when he starts telling the story of the conspiracy.
Mashhadani was simply promised his life in exchange for mentioning the names.
Mashhadi starts naming names. His fellow conspirators, he says, are in this very room.
Members of the security services, now under Saddam Hussein's step-brother Barzana Tikriti, take them out.
10 men are removed.
Nobody knows if I'm going to be next or not.
Then another 10.
And you see the faces of these people. They are as white as snow.
Then another 10.
That fear that he evoked from these people, he enjoyed.
Saddam is smoking one of those Cuban cigars that was given to him by his friend Fidel Castro.
He's very calm, very cool.
Then 10 more.
He sat back, smiled, smoked his cigar, and he was thrilled. He was enjoying the power, and he knew that now he was going to have unrivaled power. Those left that had one choice, and that is to be loyalist, extreme loyalist, and to pledge their fealty to Saddam Hussein.
You have this ecstasy of the whole hall exploding in long live Saddam, long live the Ba'ath.
In total, 66 alleged traitors are removed. A third are executed by firing squad, including Mashhadi.
The purge of 1979 is a watershed. Is a watershed. From now on, everybody is on notice. You don't antagonize Saddam under any circumstances. Don't even try it. That's 1979. That's when Iraq is becoming a real dictatorship.
In just a couple of hours, Saddam Hussein eliminates any traces of political opposition. He has achieved total power, but he has almost no time to bask in his own glory. Volcanic events abroad quickly pose a serious challenge to the fledgling dictator. Just months earlier, the Shah of neighboring Iran is overthrown by the Islamic Revolution, led by Ayatollah Khomeini. For Saddam, aside from a personal hatred of Khomeini, the new revolutionary Iran and its Islamic agenda is a threat to his regime. Most Iranians belong to the Shiite Muslim sect. So do the majority of Iraqis. Saddam and most of his government are Sunni Muslims, and Khomeini is calling for Iraq's Shiites to rise up against them. It's a volatile situation that Saddam needs to control.
So now the question is what to do. We have to humiliate Khomeini, and he says, humiliate him. I want to stick his nose in the mud. Once I do that, the Iraqi Shiites who love him so much will see that he is a paper tiger.
Saddam has another agenda: to increase his power beyond Iraq's borders and become the preeminent force in Middle Eastern politics. If he can defeat the historic enemy of the Arabs, the Iranians, he believes he will prove himself not only the strong man of Iraq, but of the entire Arab world.
He believes wholeheartedly that they will win the war within 2 to 3 weeks, and that Khomeini will cry mother. That this will be such a tremendous victory for Iraq, that Iraq will become the leader of the Arab world.
Without warning, on September the 22nd, 1980, Saddam sends his troops over the Iranian border. He believes the fighting will be over in days.
Iran was in the middle of a revolution, and there was a lot of zeal in Iran, and Iran has 3 times as large a population and 3 times as large a territory. Even not in hindsight, is a huge miscalculation.
2 years later, an estimated 100,000 Iraqi soldiers are dead, and thousands more are injured or languishing in Iranian POW camps. Worse still, Iran is starting to take Iraqi territory with the help of a shocking new tactic: mass suicide attacks. Called the Besiege, these hundreds of thousands of young volunteers go to the front intent on martyrdom.
Khomeini had those young volunteers, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, who were running on the minefields to explode them, and most of the Besieged didn't even have a rifle. Crazy tactics, totally mad. Actually made Saddam look good. All of a sudden you have these crazy guys who are dying to die. This made Saddam look really good.
For the West, the secular Saddam seems infinitely preferable to Iran's fanatical Islamic revolution.
At that time, of course, the United States, after the hostage crisis, we had tremendous animosity toward Iran. And suddenly, Saddam is a friend of the United States. Enemy of your enemy is your friend.
Yet despite Western support, he can't seem to win.
It was essentially trench warfare. These guys had a front line of troops, and it would move forward a little bit and move backwards a little bit. It was very World War I-like.
Saddam seeks a weapon to break the deadlock. The kind of weapon only a sadist would ever use. In top secret, Saddam has been building a chemical weapons arsenal that includes a nerve agent developed by the Nazis. Tabor. Former US Army doctor Mark Green, who would later meet Saddam face to face, knows just how deadly this chemical weapon is.
It's sinister in that it's tasteless, odorless, colorless. You don't know when the bomb goes off that there's a chemical that's been aerosolized. It kills very quickly, and if it's a high concentration, you pretty much are unconscious immediately.
Even Hitler refused to use Tabor on the battlefield. Saddam has no such qualms.
Saddam Hussein was the kind of guy who failure was not an option, and he didn't care about its horrific effects on humanity, and that was not even a part of the equation.
In 1983, he unleashes his chemical weapons on Iranian soldiers. The West turns a blind eye. He calculates correctly they just won't care about dead Iranians.
With no check or balance on his activity, on his actions, with no one who can actually challenge Saddam, his heart just gets darker and darker and darker, and what is right and wrong to you and I just isn't even a conscious thought of Saddam Hussein's.
Having got away with using WMDs in the war against Iran, he decides to use them again. But this time his plan is to turn his chemical weapons on his own people. For years in northern Iraq, he's had problems with the Kurdish minority.
The Kurds are a different people. They are not Arabs. They are of a different ethnicity. They speak a different language. They have a different history. They have never been completely integrated into the makeup of Iraqi society.
The Kurds want an independent homeland, and Iraq's mad venture against Iran gives them their chance. Or so they thought. It turns out Saddam isn't about to roll over without a fight.
This was a very brutal means to actually humiliate the Kurds.
He's not going to care at all about how these people might feel, how they might suffer. In fact, if he imagined it, he'd be amused.
One spring morning in 1988, a mysterious cloud spreads across the Kurdish city of Halabja.
They smelled the smell of sweet apples. They didn't really know what they were breathing, and they were breathing poison.
The civilians in Halabja had no chance.
For some, death is instant. Others suffer in excruciating agony.
The scenes of Halabja remind one of the scenes of Pompeii, because people were living their own daily life, and they were strangled to death by breathing this poison.
"5,000 civilians are dead. Nearly 10,000 more are maimed, disfigured, and disabled. No other head of state has used chemical weapons against his own people like this before Saddam Hussein.
The horror is going to spread throughout that country. And people are going to see it and be aware of it and be threatened by it and be subdued. So very clearly Saddam was making a statement, and he made it very, very loudly.
When the world expresses concerns, Saddam just lies.
Sometimes they say that the Iranians did that. Sometimes they say they were actually targeting Iranian forces and not the town of Halabja.
Ultimately, the West once again turns a blind eye. Because in July 1988, Iran accepts a ceasefire. Saddam has fought Ayatollah Khomeini, the West's enemy, to a standstill.
The war ended in this stalemate. 8 years of death and pain and nothing accomplished. Estimates as high as over 1 million people died in that war. For nothing. For nothing.
The cost of this war is every bit as horrific for the Iraqis as for the Iranians.
Iraq was devastated. No potable water, electricity, roads were destroyed, there was no food, there was nothing.
But Saddam, in classic dictator style, declares himself the winner.
He can believe anything he wants because he's so egotistical, he's so narcissistic.
But this phony victory comes at a terrible price. His nation is in ruins. 500,000 of his people are dead. and he hasn't gained an inch of territory. He responds like only a rampaging megalomaniac can, with his very own Arc de Triomphe in the center of Baghdad, the Hands of Victory, complete with military helmets of dead Iranian soldiers.
The arms in the Hands of Victory monument are supposedly sculpted after Saddam's own and are part of his self-aggrandizing character, where he thinks that he is the strength of Iraq. The arms seem to signify that he defeated Iran on the battlefield.
He declares himself the new Nebuchadnezzar and rebuilds his great ancient city of Babylon.
Every 10th brick said Babylon was rebuilt in the days of President Saddam Hussein. Every 10th brick.
He puts his name everywhere.
Everything was named Saddam International Airport, Saddam this, Saddam that.
And so is his face. Every birthday, he gives the Iraqi people a special present. Another statue of himself.
People used to say in those days that we have 32 million Iraqis. 16 million Iraqis are living Iraq. And 16 million Iraqis are Saddam Hussein's posters.
The constant use of Saddam's imagery in daily life lets the Iraqi people know that there's no alternative to Saddam.
For all the statues and murals, Saddam can't escape the fact he has driven his nation to financial ruin.
Saddam had gone into enormous debt with various Gulf states to fund the war with Iran. And by the end, Saddam was greatly indebted to Saudi Arabia, to Kuwait.
He owes them an estimated $40 billion, a tab he has no intention of paying.
He pointed to the palm of his hand and said, the cradle of human civilization is the Tigris and Euphrates River. Everyone on the planet is an Iraqi, and I'm the president of Iraq. And he was essentially saying that he was the king of the world and he could do whatever he wanted.
The self-styled king of the world turns his sights on his very rich and practically defenseless neighbor, Kuwait. The Kuwaitis are refusing to write off his $10 billion loan. Saddam also suspects they are deliberately overproducing oil to deflate the market, harming his income.
He was angry. Don't get Saddam angry.
With the largest army in the Middle East at his disposal, the answer seems obvious. In August 1990, he sends more than 100,000 troops into Kuwait.
Saddam's invasion of Kuwait was perhaps his most colossal miscalculation.
His error is that this time his enemy has friends.
This will not stand. This will not stand, this aggression against Kuwait.
You have people who are essentially sworn enemies coming together to say, no, this is not going to be tolerated.
Even Syria and Egypt, the United States and Russia unite to oppose the invasion.
Even the coalition against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan wasn't as large as the coalition against Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein had a gift. He could ignore, if it served his purpose, clear signs of an approaching storm. And he felt that the Americans, they cannot fight me because they don't want to lose people. America cannot lose people. And I, in one battle, he's saying to April Glaspie, the ambassador, that I, in one battle against the Iranians, I lost 10,000 Iraqis. In one battle. And then I turn around, fought another battle. Can you do that?
On January the 16th, 1991, Operation Desert Storm begins.
He says, but I'm not really worried, because when they start moving forward, they'll suffer such great casualties that they will have to stop in their tracks. And then we shall negotiate.
US General Norman Schwarzkopf rolls over Saddam's million-strong army in just 100 hours. Kuwait is liberated. The Iraqis are driven out. And with those mission objectives achieved, the coalition forces agree to leave the Iraqi president in power. Sensing a glimmer of weakness in his despotic regime, for the first time, large numbers of Iraqis rise up against Saddam. Kurds, Shiites, Marsh Arab tribes. Saddam crushes all with customary savagery.
In 1991, he killed at least 60,000 Shi'i young men. At least. It was a matter of killing everybody whom he suspected of being part of the revolt against him. And the numbers were very large.
In a sickening act of psychological warfare, Saddam has white flour dropped on the Kurds. With memories of the gassing of Halabja fresh in their minds, in just 2 months, 2 million Kurds flee to refugee camps.
After 1991, he didn't need to do so much any longer because people got the message.
Leaving Saddam's propaganda machine to go into overdrive.
He says, the Americans didn't dare attack me into Iraq, only in Kuwait. Why? Because they were so afraid of us. So he actually declares victory on the Americans in 1991. Later on, he says, okay, let's call it a special name. al-Ma'arik, the mother of all battles, because nowhere in human history was such a battle ever won.
In commemoration, he creates something truly weird.
He's building this magnificent mosque called the Mosque of the Mother of All Battles. And this mosque has all sorts of anti-American symbols on it. It has 4 minarets, and each one is shaped like a Scud missile, aiming up. Then on the top of the roof, it says in huge Arabic letters, La. La means no. We are telling the Americans it was an embargo and so on. No. He also puts in it a very large copy of a Quran written in his own blood. Now, is it really his own blood? Or could he possibly add some goat blood or some chicken blood? Or I don't know, I didn't check it. And maybe he just added some diluting materials, but the whole Quran is written in blood. That says it's his blood. It did take a few years, and it was a lot of blood. It's a whole Quran, for heaven's sake. This is quite impressive.
When Saddam Hussein remained in power, he probably at that point realized he's invulnerable and that no one could overthrow him. And now all of these megalomaniac traits that he had were reinforced to an extreme.
The Iraqi dictator doesn't get away totally scot-free. Under tough UN sanctions, Saddam can't sell any oil or buy any imports unless he can prove to the world he's got rid of his WMDs. He has no intention of complying.
All I know is I want to go down this road, and I'm being told I can't.
We are inspectors. We want out. You're allowing people can't get them out of the car.
Please stop. Please stop.
For the next decade, he allows sanctions to inflict endless suffering on his people, rather than open up to UN inspectors. In 1 year alone, UNICEF estimate up to 100,000 Iraqi children die for lack of food and proper medical supplies. Then Al-Qaeda's 9/11 attacks on America change everything. Saddam's defiance of UN weapons inspectors searching for WMDs causes the US to redefine his threat level.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
In March 2003, Operation Iraqi Freedom begins. Just 3 weeks later, US-led coalition forces occupy Baghdad. Among them is US Army Doctor Mark Green. He witnesses firsthand just how much the Iraqi people who were oppressed and tormented for the last 23 years hate Saddam Hussein.
I'll never forget going into Baghdad and the biggest smiles. To say they were elated, I think would be an understatement. They were kissing one another. They were kissing us. They were running out and giving kisses to American soldiers. It was amazing.
But Saddam is nowhere to be found.
He eluded American forces who were in Iraq in large numbers, and American intelligence was also in Iraq in large numbers. And Saddam, one of the most famous people on the planet, was able to hide for a very long time.
The unit that I was assigned to had the mission of finding Saddam. It's the ultimate game of hide and seek.
Eventually, Green's unit track him down to a farm a few miles from where he was born.
I'm listening to it over the satellite radio. The guys are giving off the various checkpoints and code words for meaning that this building's been checked, that this building's been checked. And I realize they're sort of repeating themselves as if they've gone back over the target and they're going over the target a second time. I heard the operator come on the radio and say, "We've got jackpot. We've got jackpot," code word for Saddam. And I'm in the back of a helicopter jumping up and down, giving high fives to my buddy because we just captured Saddam Hussein. It's pretty cool. We didn't get Hitler, we didn't get Pol Pot, we got Saddam Hussein.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Saddam Hussein may look like a shell of the man who'd menaced the world for years, but he's as defiant as ever.
He gets flown to this sort of intermediate area, and they take the hood off, and he's paraded through a cordon of special operators. He's spitting on them, yelling, "I'm the president of Iraq. How dare you do this to me?"
And then US Army Doctor Mark Green is given a special mission. He's put on suicide watch in the cell with Saddam, and they start to talk.
His charisma, I guess, was palpable. I have often described it as sort of a superior air. And I'm talking to Saddam, and I tell myself, as he's so eloquent and a bit of a superior air, Mark, don't become enamored by this guy, because he'd kill your wife in front of you for a false confession.
Nearly 3 years later, in 2006, Saddam is found guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced to death.
I'm convinced that he did not think he was going to die. Whether he thought he was going to live out the rest of his life on a Mediterranean island or something, I don't know. But he definitely didn't think that we would go through with it.
On the day of execution, Saddam reportedly refuses his last meal.
He knew that there was no way back, so why not sort of thumb his nose at the world to the very end?
Before dawn on December the 30th, 2006, his executioners come for him.
He knew he was going to die when he went in that room.
Still, Saddam refuses the hood. The hangmen start to taunt and mock their former leader.
And the way that was all handled was just very poorly done. It was very poorly done. It was deserved, but poorly done.
In a final act of defiance, Saddam Hussein gives as good as he gets. He's cut off mid-tirade. Saddam Hussein, a murderous street thug who ruthlessly obliterated all opposition to get to the top, sent hundreds of thousands to their deaths for his own vanity, turned weapons of mass destruction on his own people, and inflicted endless suffering, leaving Iraq a living hell, is dead.